So we talk about Cuffies. So we talked about Cuffies, we talked about Sambo. Did I show you this horrifically racist cartoon? Yeah. This one about the watermelon?
Wait, never mind. No.
Okay, this cartoon would be after the Civil War, but it's giving this yes or no sir way that slaves did to survive. Remember, that was a way to act very subservient. Oh, just to review. What set up the amount of cotton they must pick every day, and if you lifted, they didn't do it. What was that called?
Quota.
Yeah, that was that quota system. And what was John C. Calhoun's plan or idea that slavery was a good thing and slaves liked it? That's positive good. This one says, after the Civil War, they kept pushing this idea because remember, Cuffies have got to act stupid, subservient, or they'll be beaten. So they play the game. In fact, the masters never really know, is it legit or are they faking it? And this one is, say, Sambo, don't you think this piece of watermelon is rather large? And then you look at this horrible caricature face. Golly, boss, that ain't big, that ain't near big enough. And the whole idea is they're dumb, subservient, and a very classic racist cartoon of this era, taking how slavery were able to survive in slavery and saying, see, Africans are inferior. Now, did I say what Cuffies would do to fight back then? They would act subservient, yeah, sabotage, break stuff. And the thing is, I don't know if I mentioned this, but these words have meaning. If you call somebody a Cuffie, by definition, you're a Cuffie, you're inferior. Sambo's inferior. And so the whole idea of this is to put them down. And that is where you get these horrifically racist terms. It's not just like a bad name and you're hurting somebody's feelings. These names are racist because it allows one race to be superior to another using cultural norms. And so I believe I mentioned last Friday, if I didn't, the most derogatory term for slaves would be uneducated field hand who knows nothing, was a term called nigger. That's where it comes from. So the word had meaning. It's not a name. It's not just, oh, we don't like you, you smell. No, it is a real word that connotates racism. And why this word is so corrosive to society is, once you have people say, okay, everybody who is of a certain race, in this context black, is a Cuffie or a Sambo or whatever, you give them that name, you are already downgrading them before you know anything else about them. They're a lower stage in society. And so the idea is, well, if they're going to get up, they got to quit acting like a Cuffie if they're going to be equal. But they can't because they're inferior. So I didn't show you this. This attitude was just the norm, the way people talked about it. So this is an advertisement from 1900. So after the Civil War, but the legacy or the tentacles of slavery exist. This is shocking. It's one of those toy banks, and look what they call it. That wasn't even seen as a So it's one of those mechanical banks that are really popular where you wind a crank, you put the coin in the hand and then put it into its mouth. That kind of just racism becomes almost casual that way. You wouldn't say this about a white person, but it's just the norm here. The tentacles of racism and slavery would go on, but they would fight back against it. That's why they would break things. The other thing, write down another form of slave resistance, running away. Slaves would deprive the master of the work. A lot of times, slaves would just simply take a quick run away. That's a very weird thing to say. But basically just run away for a few days, hide in the woods. They know they're going to get beaten when they get back, but they stood up. They showed free will. It might not seem like a big deal to us. You're going to have to go back anyways, but at least they said, I'm still in charge of myself. It's such a big deal to show they had free will. But this is a good one because it shows 150, 100, that's in early 19th century. By the 1850s, over $1,200 reward. That shows you how valuable slaves were becoming. The Underground Railroad then, you already know the basics of it, but the Underground Railroad let me make sure this is recording, would be, now it's decentralized. Let's see. It's a decentralized path to the north, and it would not be one trail or one way north. It would be more than anything else, safe houses, places for slaves to hide in the very harrowing trip north. Because all through the South would be these bands of armed thugs. Informally, we call them like a posse. I think you've probably heard that term before. Have you? And they would run down slaves with, use dogs and hunt down runaway slaves to get the reward. And a lot of times they'd be killed. I mean, this was an incredibly harrowing trip, but they would still make the trip north. Various safe houses, or if they get to a harbor, they could be smuggled on board a ship. This area was very hostile to freed slaves. Even though they didn't have slavery, they wanted to be a white republic. So they really had to go up here or in Canada, down into Mexico. And everybody is risking their life that's going to be involved in this. The Savannah First African Baptist Church, I put this up here because I've been here. I've been to a couple where I saw these safe houses, one in Illinois, one in Tennessee, and then this one. And this is the one that stuck with me because this was the first church in the United States that was solely made by Africans. And these were slaves, African Americans, and they would work all day, and then at night, literally dark, they would come in and build this, and however they could make a little bit of money if their master or donated, they would build this. And to the masters, they actually thought it was kind of funny, but also a great way to control them. They thought if they're worried about the afterlife, they won't complain about the life they're in. This is the tower that eventually would have the steeple came down in a hurricane. So that's what it looks like today. If you get a chance, go to Savannah. Go. Has anyone been there? Savannah, I think it's right up there with my all-time favorite towns in the United States. It's beautiful. It is just cool. It's kind of touristy, but it is just such a neat, pretty place. If you ever get a chance, Savannah is great. That's when my wife and I talk about going to Georgia again. I was like, God, I don't want to go to Atlanta, but I want to go to Savannah. Savannah is really amazing. And they take you on a guided tour, and the church doesn't have a lot of money, so they need people to come in and do this. And in the floor of the church, there's all these holes, and they make various designs in them. And the designs sometimes religious, sometimes it looks more like tribal. And the whites thought, oh, they're so funny. Why they have holes? Not just, yeah, they're air holes on the right track. There was a 4-foot false floor. And so runaways could hide in there. They could hide and breathe. It was about 600 yards from the church to the river. Savannah River is a massive harbor. Such a wide river. And the tunnel was about 4 by 4. Can you imagine just the ropes were this big? And they would crawl almost 600 yards there, and they could be smuggled on board ships. So this was a big stop. If you get to Savannah, go. Almost forgot to say this. By the 1850s, runaway slaves were called, so we have to get fugitives. Fugitives. And so in 1850, a fugitive meant a runaway slave. And the thing was, the Constitution said that states must return fugitives. And this is going to be a really controversial issue in the 1850s. Fugitives. So fugitives mean runaway slaves. Two of the best-known conductors, one we saw in the video the other day, Harriet Tubman, and the Sojourner Truth also. She was not only that, but a leading abolitionist. She, too, was a runaway slave when it came north. Got involved in the Second Great Awakening, the Bergdorfer District. She actually was a leading member of one of the bigger church/cults. It's really she has a really interesting history. But they would be two of the leading conductors and literally risking their life. And I love this part about Harriet Tubman. So here she is, because she's a very determined person, but they still wanted her to dress like a wave. You know, she's got a dress on, and she looks relatively, okay, I was going to say prim and proper, but she has a determined, not prim face. But I love this painting, and this is at one of the museums I saw in Charleston, so when I found this, I had to make sure I copied it, but that's really her running away sometimes, yes, with a rifle, and yes, they're risking her life, but she led people from South Carolina and North Carolina to freedom. It's a pretty amazing person.
What was the other lady's?
Sojourner Truth. Not a real name, that's a biblical name. She had a remarkable life, too. There were male conductors, and there were some whites too, but the reason I chose these two is because women would be very important conductors because of the way women were treated and things were expected of them. They could kind of hide these because people didn't expect women to do this. So they took advantage of being underestimated. The last big one we'll talk about is slave rebellions. There were slave rebellions as long as there have been slavery. There have been slave rebellions. And there were a lot of slave rebellions, just a couple massive ones in Brazil, in the Caribbean. But this is what we got to get here. Very few in the U.S. Very few slave rebellions because the percentage of slaves was so low. There are so few slaves in relation to the number of whites, rebellions became too risky. You know, sabotage and running away were the biggest ways to resist. Now, there's going to be a few rebellions. There are a few before the United States became a country. The biggest rebellion in American history would be New Orleans, 1811. But this was always seen as an aberration and sometimes unfortunately forgotten because New Orleans had just been bought from France and it had a Spanish legacy. So they basically tied it to them. It was very well organized, very well planned, by slaves who could read and write, which was very common. And their plan was to go from plantation to plantation and attack New Orleans. They were sent back by militia. And this is them running away. And a lot of them, yes, they thought that was the American flag. They assumed because they're now part of the land of the free, that they would be treated as free people. Of course not. And hundreds would be, when the rebellion was put down, hundreds were caught, killed, their heads cut off, put on pikes along the path of their march as a warning. And one of the most moving memorials to a slave rebellion, it's actually shocking. I'll show you a picture of it. They came back and they put a model of the heads along the path of the march, and it's one of the things, it's like, what? It does take you back when you know why they did it, what it represents. It's a really interesting idea. There's a plaque and a few other things, but you can't miss this. Another rebellion, actually probably wasn't a rebellion at all, but it's going to be blamed on a free black in Charleston, South Carolina, Denmark Vesey. Denmark Vesey would be accused of planning a slave rebellion. And you remember the division of labor. Who do you think told, or at least would be supposedly told, that Vesey, a freedman, was going to lead a slave rebellion? Who? Say it a little bit louder. Yeah, that was held slaves, exactly. And they did it. They told on them. But we don't know if this is real. Vesey could have been set up. The South, slave areas hate freed slaves. They always thought they might trigger a rebellion. And so Denmark Vesey could have been set up to regain control of the freed population. There's enough evidence to say that's probably true. He was framed. So they could crack down on freed blacks. But the rebellion we need, the biggie, is Nat Turner. Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831. Nat Turner was educated. He was a lay preacher, which means he wasn't ordained. But in the process of his interpretation of Christianity and the hypocrisy of the Christians that were the slaveholders, he began to organize a slave rebellion. He would give, out in the woods, would give sermons, but this sermon would also be a plan. And a little bit like New Orleans, started a plantation. And this would be a sensationalized version of what the slaves would do. They killed everybody
every white in the house. Slave rebellions are horrible beyond imagination. The slaves know that if they're caught, they're going to be killed, so they got to get rid of anybody who might tell, and they want revenge. They're just awful. That's why they're so scary. There's no prisoners in a slave rebellion. They know what's going to happen to them. But they killed them, and the idea was go to plantation to plantation, gather up slaves, and then it was unclear if they'd go to the Appalachian Mountains and keep going. Who told them? Yeah, same thing happened. Exactly right. And when the militia came down, Virginia militia, and they had cannon, they blew them away. 50 whites would be killed in Nat Turner's rebellion. 50, over 200 blacks. Nat Turner, there's a sketching of Turner. He'd be captured, and they had a trial, and then they executed him. The trial became very sensationalized. There's a really good book called The Confessions of Nat Turner, where they kind of take a little bit of it about the trial, they make a sensationalized story out. It's a really interesting story. But it was one of those trials, you will get a fair trial, and then you'll be executed. You know, there's no doubt he is going to be executed. But Virginia was desperate to show that they aren't just going to lynch all the slaves. But Nat Turner's rebellion terrified the South. Terrified it. You ever got that? They terrified the South. And the reason why is they blamed abolitionists. The abolitionist movement had just started it was just very vocal in the North. Now, I'll come back to this in a second about abolitionists. But what they did is, every state after 1831 would pass stronger slave codes they literally called Nat Turner laws. And Nat Turner laws were going to crack down on the problems that led to Nat Turner's rebellion. So we already mentioned slave codes, the Nat Turner codes. So things like, for example, limiting education of slaves. When I was a youth growing up, I remember being told that slaves could not read or write. Actually, yeah, they could, but it was the Nat Turner laws that really cracked down on it, so they couldn't read abolitionist material. That's the big thing. But also, no more assembly of slaves. So they limited assembly, and they greatly restricted the freedom of all blacks. Every black person in the South, after Nat Turner, had to have a badge, essentially almost like a dog tag. They had to have in the 19th or 20th century, it's an internal passport. Something that says if they're a slave, who owns them, or if they're free or not. If a freedman, so a former slave, didn't have that tag, they'd be arrested and put back into slavery. So it restricted their movement. It also did something else. It censored the press. The Nat Turner laws cracked down on free speech. Really cracked down on free speech. The idea being abolitionist material caused this rebellion. They also began to strengthen their militias. We better get our militias stronger. We better prepare for war. Similar thing happened after John Brown. Similar thing. Yeah, Nat Turner was big. So, what of the abolitionists? Okay, we've already saw these in the video you read about them, so I would briefly just mention it. Remember William Lloyd Garrison, his newspaper, The Liberator. Now, nothing happens in a vacuum. It's no coincidence to Southerners that you have William Lloyd Garrison starting his newspaper, The Liberator, in 1831. Same year as Nat Turner's rebellion. Do you remember that video we watched when I was gone on Thursday? Well, no, I wasn't gone for you guys, but The Cause, and it mentioned Elijah Lovejoy, who was lynched by a Southern mob, 1831. It was after Nat Turner. So nothing happens in a vacuum. Also, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was the runaway slave who fought his own freedom, become a tireless fighter for civil rights and equal rights after the Civil War. He would push very hard during the Civil War to have black soldiers fight in combat, more than anything else, to show that they have earned and deserved citizenship. Actually, it does, yeah.
Douglas has 2 S's. Frederick Douglass does have 2 S's. Hey, Rose, I did that. Better go add one. I like that picture. And here's the thing. Most Northerners, all the way up to the Civil War, were not abolitionists. But all of them hated the censorship in the South. As they saw, that's not liberty. That's why I put the question mark there. Remember the whole issue of slavery in the territories. Even Northerners who didn't mind slavery in the South didn't like how repressive it is. And here is supposedly Garrison being subdued by Southerners. That's his paper, Abolitionists Frown Down. This is talking about home of the oppressed, about the gag rule of the Congress. Slavery cannot allow free speech by anybody. And I'll tell you what, abolitionists in the South, they'd be lynched regardless of color. Happened a number of times in the 1850s. But one of the complexities of the abolitionist system would be personified by the American Colonization Society. The American Colonization Society started in 1820. They were abolitionists. They wanted to get rid of slavery, but it also told you their attitude towards the former slaves, Africans. They wanted them free, and then what? Yes, sent away. The majority of abolitionists, we would consider in some different degrees, are racist. They do not believe in equality. They just want to get rid of slavery. They want to send them, and they would use terms like back to Africa. And so this is the coin or currency set up in the country they would create in Africa with the capital Monrovia, named after the president when that happened, Monroe. And what country is this? And these are former slaves who are now soldiers in that country. Yeah. Here it is. Named for liberty. Liberia. Yeah, I thought you were close. You said,
yeah. I said Libya. Yeah.
I heard. Because you got the lib.
Yeah.
Like Liberia or Liberty, it'd be one of only 2 countries that would not be colonized or colonized again by the turn of into the 20th century. And the idea was send them back to Africa. Now, first off, this is clearly racist. They want a white republic, they just don't want slavery. So this is not like, yay, we love equality and freedom. No, we don't. Not here, at least. And the other thing, back to Africa? Africa, huge. Where at in Africa? In fact, the vast majority, almost all by the 1830s and 40s, slaves were born in the United States. You're just going to send them here, where they'll never really be part of the population. In fact, they would kind of dominate and almost rule like virtual kings over the people who actually live there. But think about how ridiculous that would be. So just imagine people who of European descent. You're going back to Europe, and they just kind of drop you off somewhere, maybe in Portugal. Say, good luck. Or somebody of Asiatic or Asian descent, and they just drop you off somewhere in Asia. Could be India, could be Japan, could be Vietnam. But you're Asian, go back. And so this is just phenomenal way they thought. It's basically, okay, you're free now. We don't want to mess with you. A lot of free soilers like the idea of colonization. They like that idea. Slavery and the effects would be messy, sent into Africa. The most famous free soiler of them all liked colonization. Abraham Lincoln, yes. Lincoln thought that was probably the way to go. He would eventually change his mind. It's not that you have to always be stuck with your ridiculous points of view. Not ridiculous for lots of reasons, but let's get to the most basic element. How would you send 4 million people back? 4 million. It would be impossible. It'd be disruptive. It couldn't happen, let alone how ridiculous the whole thing was. So, I want to do that about slavery and talk about those issues because remember the big deal.
that cool? The Mexican Cession. Remember, the whole thing was, what system is going to go into here? Slavery, the system of slavery, or the capitalistic system of the North. And what proviso said no slavery in the territories of the Mexican Cession?
Wilmot.
Very good. And what treaty ended the Mexican War? Close. Something.
Guadalupe.
Yeah, Guadalupe Hidalgo. San Jacinto got Mexico their independence.
Okay.
And who was elected president in 1848? Oh, rough and ready? The Whig, the war hero, Monterrey, Buena Vista,
Taylor.
Taylor. So Zachary Taylor's president, and he's got to decide what to do. But what was discovered in California? Californians, yes, lots of them.
Is this like a new thing? This is a legislative.
So this is now relieving slavery and now going to what we call, here's where we come, the fiery 50s.
What?
The 50s, the 1850s.
No longer.
Yeah. Even though it all connects, obviously. But I want to get to, tell you, okay, what was the systems? We did industrialization once before, now we're doing slavery, and let's do this. This is what Zachary Taylor's idea was. Taylor now is president. California, at the end of 1849, wanted to become a state, a free state. Zachary Taylor is president. Nobody knew, in fact, nobody in American history, except for maybe one other person, has been less prepared to be president. The first time he ever voted was 1848. He voted for himself. And so the point was, well, our electors pledged for himself. No one knew what he was going to do. The only other two that had as little political experience to become president would be Ulysses S. Grant and Dwight Eisenhower. And Eisenhower was actually really close. Dwight Eisenhower didn't even know what party he was until 1952. Then he decided, I'll be a Republican. Well, Taylor looked at the problem, and it was, remember, it's slavery where? So let's just get rid of the territory step. The step was unorganized land, territories, states. Let's just make them states. And that became Taylor's plan. Ever got that? States. 2 huge states. California and New Mexico. If you look at this map right here, it's the pink is California, and all this area in orange was going to be Taylor's idea of New Mexico. It would be big enough to encompass enough population to become a state. And here's the deal. They would come in with their existing laws. Remember, Mexico did not have slavery. So they would both come in free. And that became Taylor's idea. We'll skip the territory step, 2 free states, problem solved, no civil war.
So it was California.
A massive New Mexico. So Taylor really thought this would solve the problem. Well, as you can imagine, Southerners were like, what a great idea. Southerners went nuts, especially a new breed of Southerners. Yeah.
Why were they both going to be free?
They would have their existing laws. So the idea was, remember, Mexico didn't have slavery?
Yeah.
And so they would come in with their existing laws, and therefore there'd be no controversy. There wouldn't be slaveholders coming in or free people coming in. We wouldn't have that argument at all. They would just come in as they are. Like Texas did. Just come in as they are. So there won't be the fight. Well, a new breed of Southerners called the Fire Eaters. Younger, rabid Southerners who no compromise. The Fire Eaters wanted no compromise. As they saw it, this is a direct attack on their way of life. Already the North is getting a greater population. But what happens if you have these states come in, no more slave states? They're condemning the South to what? That constant fear of rebellion. So Edmund Ruffin would be a congressman for Virginia, and he would take the credit of firing the very first cannon, or lighting the first cannon that bombarded Fort Sumter in 1861. To give you an idea, Yancey and Mason would become two leading Confederate politicians when the war began. They were young senators. They all hung around together. Congress is becoming more and more polarized. They don't talk. They only talk to each other and get each other riled up. And as they saw it, no compromise. And they immediately threatened secession. Immediately, just boom. You do this and that's an act of war. We can't do it. And everybody knew secession meant civil war because the United States cannot survive if states start leaving. Because if states start leaving, there's no stopping them. It's over. The U.S. is done. So they don't necessarily want civil war, but as they see it, we have no choice. Taylor said, fine, I'll lead the army against you. So Taylor is kind of acting like Jackson. Into the breach, one more time, Henry Clay. Henry Clay knows he's not going to be president. He already has the reputation of the great compromiser. This is the last photograph ever taken of Henry Clay. And Henry Clay decides an S went off. But an all-encompassing compromise bill called the Omnibus. There's supposed to be an S here. The Omnibus bill. Omnibus just simply means it encompasses everything. This won't just deal with the Mexican Cession. Clay thought he could come up with a law that would compromise all the problems. One big bill. He passes that and he'll be forever known as the man who saved the Union. Because he knows the end is near. Now the thing is this. Once he came up with this big bill, it couldn't pass on its own. It was too divisive. And let me show you this right here. Don't write this down. Let me just show you what's in the bill. California be free and no slavery in D.C. Who's not going to vote for that? What section of the country won't vote for that? And then popular sovereignty and a tougher fugitive slave law to return runaway slaves. The North won't vote for that. The bill won't pass as one big bill. No support. And Zachary Taylor says, I'm going to have this at all. No way will I support this. And the funny thing is, the ironic thing, the great compromiser, Henry Clay, refused to compromise. He would not alter the bill. Back in 1820, he's the one who broke up the Missouri Compromise. He won't break this up. And the thing was, Henry Clay doesn't have long to live. In less than a year, what's that? Yes, that's his death mask. Before photography, a way to remember somebody was you would take a plaster cast of their face. So it'd be life mask too, but a death mask, because how should I remember them? What do you have? So you could keep their face, a picture of it. That's his death mask. Hair, they would just usually just smooth out the mold because it would be too rough. And I love the smile. Yeah, just like he knew something. Daniel Webster, the Whig from Massachusetts, would come up and give one of his greatest speeches. Vote for the Compromise of 1850. And what he said was, very clearly, even though Northerners are opposed, as he says, not as a Massachusetts man, not as a Northern man. Yes, you might be opposed to this, but as an American, we must support this. Now, a couple things about Webster. Webster, one of the old lions who helped save the country, one of those compromisers in the 1830s and 1840s, he too is near the end. But doesn't he look like an angry owl in that picture right there? Doesn't he? In fact, you ready? I can do owl calls. I don't want to do it too much because why? Yeah, just a swarm of owls will cover the school. But he too is near the end. A year and a half after that, he too would die. One more man would come out against it. In fact, he was so ill from probably tuberculosis that he had to be carried in on a stretcher. And they propped the stretcher up so he could listen to James Mason give his speech. Who is this? John C. Calhoun.
Is he gonna die?
And what's his plan? Look at the finger. 2 presidents. We'd have presidents of the United States. A northern president and a southern president, both with a veto. Can you argue with that? So if the North passes a bill that the South doesn't like, it would be vetoed, or vice versa. He said that is the only way to save this union, because if not, the North will eventually take control and the South will have no choice but to secede. Civil war. He saw this as the only way to save the country.
He's against them.
Yeah, he's against it. He wants 2 presidents. Of course, that means nothing will ever get passed. Now, yeah,
What was he against?
compromise of 18. Any compromise.
Any compliment?
Yeah, he didn't want anything that we now know as a compromise of 1850. He's opposed to that omnibus bill.
So wait, did like Webster like break down Clay's omnibus bill?
Not yet. No.
Not yet.
Webster, no, I mean, that isn't going to happen yet. Webster just supported his omnibus bill.
So what's the compromise based?
We're coming to it.
Oh, okay.
And yes, he too is near the end.
So they all died.
Within a year of each other. And even though he is wrong on so many things, he still thought this was his way to defend the country. This horrible man in so many ways. And I know what you're thinking. What about a death mask?
He didn't want one.
I just want you to imagine something. You wake up in the middle of the night, kind of a stormy, dark evening. Something woke you up in the start. Right? Can you imagine that, right? Just dark. You open your eyes and you see this floating over your bed. Ah! That would be an awesome Halloween mask.
We should do that.
That is Calhoun's death mask. He's just looking at you going like, "Whoa." That's a great face. Yeah, they would, what they do with the eyes is they would shave it so it could kind of look like eyes. And he wasn't bald, but
You can see where his hair kind of was.
I think they scratched that in after. And I know what you're thinking, then what about Andrew Jackson? What would he have had to say? Well, he's dead. Remember, he died in 1845. But he was asked if he has any regrets. And where you go? Ready for the regrets? That's a great regret.
Such two regrets.
I know. Okay, you're right. He didn't shoot Henry Clay and then hang John C. Darrell.
Oh.
Okay, then tomorrow we'll finish this part of the 1850s. You have to have chapter 15 read. Is everyone got a review list? The test will be on Friday. I'm looking at what's done. Multiple choice, short ID, a couple of little things.
So we have a quiz tomorrow
Maybe.
on the 15th.
I haven't made one yet. I'll decide tomorrow morning.
Okay.
I'm gonna read hers like
Is that from English, Emily?
yeah,
Is that, who's your English teacher?
break up,
Who?
break up.
Oh, okay.
Hey, 2 things. One, thank you for writing my letter of recommendation.
You betcha.
And then also, my son wants my first quarter grades, and I was wondering if there's any.
Who does?
The college that I'm applying to.
Oh, you know, I didn't even think.